Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's NCLUG Tech Talk from Bentley. Today's webinar is focused on I Just Need to Know, an introduction to OpenRoad analysis tools with Bentley. OpenRoads Designer includes various tools to review and analyze a model. So we'll start taking a look at some of these tools. But first, I wanted to cover some housekeeping details before we get started. This is a webinar presentation, so all attendees will be muted. At any time during the webinar, you'll have a chance to ask questions in the chat box if you want to type those in, and I can ask the questions for you, or you can raise your hand if you have a question. Use the raise the hand feature button. As time allows, the presenter will address as many questions as they can during the presentation or at the end of the session. We are recording this webinar and we'll share the link after the event. NCLUG is offering PDH credits to those who've registered on the website for this event. If you were forwarded the meeting link, you just want to make sure that you go and register at the nclug.com website so that we can link your license number with your name. After this session, NCLUG will send out a PDH receipt to all those who attended the slide meeting. No credit will be given to those who view the recorded presentation. As of this meeting, PDH credits have been sent out through September 9th. The ones from September 16th should be going out soon, and then, of course, from today will go out soon. If you did not get one, if you missed any of those meetings, you can just email us at events@nclug.com with your questions, and we'll try to help answer those or track down. And stay tuned for at the end of the presentation, we'll do a drawing for a gift card. So be sure to stay tuned for that. And now with that, I'd like to hand it over to Dan Sheldon of Bentley as our presenter today. Thanks for joining us today, Dan.
Thank you, Patty. Good afternoon, everybody. As Patty mentioned, my name is Dan Sheldon. We'll be covering the Just Need to Know, introducing the OpenRoads analysis tools. This was presented for the first time at our 2018 users conference. And as of a week ago, when I was asked to present this, I hadn't really looked at this information, then dug in, and we've got lots of content to cover, so I'll try and get through as much of it as I can and not take up too much of your guys' time. I'm happy to share the presentation afterwards in PDF to the group as well, and as Patty mentioned, it is being recorded. So again, my name's Dan Sheldon, and I'm a civil consultant. I joined Bentley just a little over a year ago. I have 20 years of experience in civil design. Started my career in surveying, doing road design, ended up in CAD management. I currently call just outside of Milwaukee, Wisconsin home. So I'm currently sitting in the Midwest. So as we get started here, why is analysis important? So this happens to be Jeff Martin put the presentation together 2 years ago, and that happens to be his son from about 3 years ago, posing for the picture here of imagine you're an elite race car driver and now they blindfold you. So without the analysis tools, you really aren't able to do the things you need to within our software. The other way I like to look at the analysis stuff as well is a lot of times you play detective on your projects. You come into the project as either somebody new on the team or a reviewer, and you've got to get up to speed on the design. The person who's been working in the project, the entire project is obviously very familiar with what's the content in your design and everything. But for folks who have to come and go from the project, they're either a reviewer or they're an external person who just has a small part in the project. You're going to need these tools to be able to look and find the pieces and parts and the different information that you're going to need to utilize to complete your part of your project. So the customer, as the list there shows, there's a number of different pieces of that customer role, as we'll describe it here, that could be, that you'll need to utilize these different tools. So the different categories that this has kind of been broken down into, the feature attributes, the spatial representation of information, the specialty type items with our site visibility and maybe aquaplaning tools are the topics we'll cover today. What won't be covered that would also be, classified as doing analysis type stuff would be sheeting and quantities. So those parts that aren't covered, what I can tell you is we do have a number of workshops out on our Bentley Learn site. This is a link to that site. So in the PDF that I'll deliver, you can get to it, or if you go to Bentley Learn, you go to the OpenRoads Designer, you'll find this class 00, OpenRoads Designer, Roadway Design and Modeling Fundamentals. We have a number of classes under this one particular course, but the two to mention right here are plan production courses, creating plan and profile sheets, and creating cross-section sheets are both under there. So we have classes on that topic. And then the other one would be specifically related to quantities and earthwork. And again, under that same class fundamentals, we have a class called quantities and earthwork. So go through all the number of ways to get through and generate quantities. Sorry if there is a question. Okay. So another thing would be just going through that entire course of the fundamentals there. We have additional courses for quick start navigating the interface, analyzing the display or the terrain, a course on geometry for road design, beyond centerline, editing templates, and corridor modeling as well. So just a quick plug for all that information out there on the Bentley Learn site, that if you would like more information, you can always look that up. So as we look at this and we talk about just the platform tools, so the very first thing that we can look at from looking at analyzing our product is literally we can just hover over an element. Haven't even clicked on anything yet. So in this case here, we can see that when we hover on an element, we get information about what type of element it is, who it belongs to, whether it's related to an alignment or corridor, what feature definition that element might be on, that this has potentially an active profile, the level it's showing up on, and also maybe even information about just the reference that it's coming from as well. So lots of information just from the standpoint of just hovering over any element in our files. The second thing would be doing a click on an element. So even though I'm just looking at a screen capture here of this element, a few quick notes that jump out at me. We notice that there are a couple different glyphs showing up here indicating that these were elements that were snapped to another element, indicating some type of rule that we wanted to place on this piece of geometry. The other thing would be the way that this curve was built. So I can see I've got two different curves. This information shown for this curve indicates that it was probably set as a draw from element. So we drew an arc from this first initial tangent, drew an arc at a particular length and deflection. Once we left that to that design criteria, we drew another piece of tangent from an element. And then if we come to this last element, I see some information indicating that that was set off at an offset of 71 feet. Again, developing an entire piece of tangent, and then we came back in with something like more of a fillet, or in the case of OpenRoads Designer, a simple arc that went between two tangents and trimmed those down. And then this was complexed together to create an entire alignment. So I have a link here at the bottom of the page here also showing this all in detail that will be available, that you'll be able to click on in the PDF as well. So besides clicking on the element and having it highlight and show you information about it, if you click and hover on an element, we have contextual ribbons that pop up with ORD, or OpenRoads Designer. Again, starting from left to right, the first one will be a quick properties dialog box that has, again, a number of different pieces of information that'll be listed on there, some that can even be edited straight from that dialog box. In the case of an alignment, maybe you want to open up the profile again to look and see what is going on with the vertical component of this geometry. And then another element would be the ability to take a look at a report. One good way to always know if that tool that you're clicking on is a report option is you're always looking for the paperclip in it. You'll notice that a paperclip will always help generate some type of report. And we'll talk about that in more detail here just shortly. So again, in this case, this contextual one for an alignment gives us a certain tools that are related to an alignment. When clicking on something like a corridor, you see that that contextual ribbon changes to match what it is that you have clicked on. So another option for that would be looking at our terrains. If we click on a terrain, we get the, again, properties dialog, the quick properties being a condensed version of the properties, maybe not as big as what would be shown in the full properties dialog box. Again, with that ability to make changes to those. In this case, you can see that maybe I wanted to turn off my minor contours. These are all options when you see them in bold that you can usually make a change to. One quick note on this is that if you're trying to click on this and you're trying to do the selection by moving your mouse down, and sometimes that doesn't work the easiest, another way to do that is actually just to double click on the item, and that'll function more like a light switch, turning it on and off without having to try and pick from the pick lists, because sometimes that can be finicky at times, I've noticed. So, and again, you can see the list of items, contours, triangles, break lines. We can add in flow arrows. We can indicate our high and low points, all this different information that can be derived from just a single element here. And those are just having the ability to turn those options on and off. So when we talk about the properties dialog box then, so if I've selected on an element within MicroStation, this is, if you came from the V8i era of using our product, this would have been the old I info button. It is now referred to as our properties. I prefer to always pretty much now have my properties dialog box sitting open on the screen so that as I click on elements, if there's pieces of information, maybe such as the feature name that I want to change, or I've mistakenly applied the wrong feature definition, I can always make that change. Plus, there's additional information listed in the properties dialog box that you can continue to expand on and look at as well. So again, as it related to earlier when we clicked on an alignment, a corridor, or a terrain, the contextual ribbons that came out would adjust to the information that would be shown. That is the same case in our properties dialog box here. So if I click on just contours here, we can see that I can get to information maybe about the major and minor interval that maybe I would like to change. If I'm in a really flat area, maybe I want to lower these down to 1 foot and half a foot interval, or maybe I'm in a really steep area and I want to increase that to something like a 20 and 5 interval so that the contours are more legible and I can see what's happening in the terrain. But then at the same time, if I drill down one more level and I click on something like a major contour, I get additional information there. So information about maybe what level it's being displayed on, if the major contour has a major label, what text style is being displayed, information about all of that different content is shown as you continue to click down on each of the layers or levels of the information here. So another point that can be brought up about analyzing our data is just using your eyeballs, using the 3D model as you look to see, is the information that I'm trying to depict and my design coming through and being represented correctly. So in the case here of taking our side road here and making sure it's tying into the bridge abutment and all of these components are matching up and things are looking correct, that's just another very valuable piece of information, looking at the 3D model, being able to turn it, rotate it, look at different components, and use that as a way to analyze your design and make sure things are looking as you intended them to be. So a few of those options come into play here. So maybe you want to look at your terrains in different manners, and one of those would be a theometric display. In this case, we're looking at this in height, and you can see that a legend is being displayed here. So blue areas being around this elevation, and then the red higher elevations showing up, and then you can notice the transitions across this terrain, all by elevation. A good way to look for high spots or peaks or low points that maybe got misinterpreted or aren't showing up correctly, that maybe a triangle mesh wouldn't give you the easiest way to notice that element. Looking at the same terrain here, but instead you notice that we have a few different options, and this one being by slope. And again, we notice what the different indications of these different slopes are being depicted as. So the blue being the flat and the red and orange being more steep slopes. Just another way to look at our information. In case you're not familiar with the display styles, we notice that from our view attributes dialog box, you can pick those different theometric heights. You can hit the 3 dots next to that, and that'll bring up our display styles, which is where these can be housed and actually saved and modified. Beyond that, then you can also click on the icon here, which will open up these 2 boxes. The first one being the display, which then you can set some information, something like the color scheme in which you'd like to use for how your information is displayed, a range of elevations or slopes is what you can do there. And then on the second dialog box with the legend, you can decide, how do I want to divide that up? In this case, a count of 10, maybe I want 5, maybe I just want 2. You know, there's a number of different ways you could look at that. I could set a transparency on that overall mesh there, because that is able to be printed and sent to your PDF or sheet, and the legend would show up on there and everything. Along with that then is the ability, once you have something looking the way you'd like to and you want to reuse it, we can save that information and then recall that to be used over and over again once you have your settings the way you'd like to. So the next piece of the OpenRoads tool set that is used is what we refer to as Explorer. The Explorer has all the information on 2 main topics that I will point out today, at least. The OpenRoads model. Here you can see, again, information related to an alignment. You can see terrains, corridors. We can also come down here and see that the OpenRoads standards, all the information that's being pulled in from our DGN libs to set the feature definitions or annotation groups, will be found here. And then if you're into more specific topics, such as at this time, it was called subsurface utility, we're now referring to it as drainage utility or survey, those individual pieces of information are housed here inside the Explorer. So again, looking at the features, feature properties, dependencies, as we continue to click the arrows here, these will continue to expand. At any point, you can right click on an element. And again, one thing that has always been something I've noticed about Bentley products is we don't just have 1 or 2 ways. Usually there's 3 or even 4 ways sometimes to get to the same information. And it just depends on how you develop your workflows and become comfortable finding that information. But you'll see that if I right click on the element here inside of the Explorer, I can get to the geometry reports. Again, just jumping back a few slides here to show that that was a common theme here, is that, again, right clicking and going to the contextual menu, you can see again geometry reports. And before this is all said and done, I'll show another way to also indicate, you know, how to get to that same information in a couple different ways. And again, as you expand out this option, you'll see the individual elements that make up an entire alignment. And we have options to do zoom to those elements, so that if, again, you're a reviewer, you're not familiar with this project, you know you need to be looking at, in this case, London Road, you can find it in the Explorer dialog box. It will highlight for you as you select it in this dialog box. And then you always have the option to say zoom to, so that you can, it'll take you specifically to that location inside the OpenRoads environment. Also, other options being additional options to edit and delete items even. Maybe you even also would like to choose to isolate an element because there's a lot of stuff going on in your file. You can choose to isolate that. That'll turn everything else off and you'll just be able to see exactly that individual element. Then just remind you that to get that back, come back to that same spot and say clear isolation. That'll just turn everything back on without you having to go into the level displays, turning things on and off that maybe you're not familiar with. This is just a quicker way to review that information. So another tool we have would be the Civil Message Center. Again, if you've applied information such as design standards to your alignments, you're specified the design speed and the different criteria that's associated to a particular alignment, you'll notice that certain glyphs again will show up along the alignment, indicating that there is information there. You'll even get red X's indicating that a particular item does not meet the minimum requirement of your design requirements. And again, when you're looking at the Civil Message Center, if we look at from a ribbon perspective, you'll look at the geometry tab, and then on the first primary toolbox here, you'll find that if you drop down, you'll find the Civil Message Center. That'll open up this dialog box here. And again, you'll see potentially your different warnings and or errors. And you can right click on any one of those and also say zoom to take me to that element to understand where it fits into your design and have a look at it. So let's look at some more general analysis tools here. So if we look at, say, we want to look at the vertical profile, that would be part of the analysis of looking at the horizontal and vertical tied together. But besides that, another element that I can notice in this view here is that we see this kind of gray box outline here. What we've done there is use this tool right here called 3D Cut. That will cut through your 3D model. So any information being depicted in your 3D model then will be referenced into your profile here. So there could be a bridge that's in your 3D model that then would show up here and show you that cross section. The side road of the road going underneath this main line here would also get depicted here, and we would see that information. If we had any utilities in exactly this plane or crossing through this plane, those as well could potentially show up. One thing to note about this 3D cut is that, again, if you look at your properties dialog box, you have the ability for a cut offset. So this is just a single cut through at an exact plane of the center line, but we can come here and we could move that cut offset to maybe 10 foot left or 10 foot right to cut through at a travel lane or somewhere else particular that you're wanting to see the information. Because again, if this was a divided roadway and you've got a median, you wouldn't see the bridge here. That's why we're not seeing it with an offset cut of 0. But at 21 foot left is where the bridge actually begins. We could move this offset to a negative or positive 21 foot. And then because the bridge is modeled in 3D, we would start to see components of that bridge actually show up here, just to give us an indication of some of how those pieces are all fitting together. Along with, you see our active terrain always being depicted. And again, any object that would be in the 3D model that would be, again, along the center line at this plane would show up. So another way to cut through the 3D model would be using our dynamic sections. And again, the dynamic section gives you the ability to cut through the model. Anything, again, that's represented in the 3D model shows up in these sections as you move through those, including any other terrains. Utilities, if we're depicting our volumes for our cuts and fills, those will be depicted in shapes and colors as well. And along with that, actually any 3D object, truly anything MicroStation based 3D model that shows up or is referenced into here would show up. So anything from a open buildings, say there's a site design sitting here and we've got the design of the building. If your section is long enough and is cutting through here, it would show up. If it's not coming from open buildings, but you have a site design and you just place a MicroStation cube that represents the building in 3D and you reference it in here, again, it would show up and be depicted as, in your cross section. So you'd be able to indicate where that building might be located, if there would be any impacts, any type of object that is 3D is shown. So along with the dynamic section view that we additional information that can be pulled from here, we can do a temporary dimension. So as we snap between 2 points on the template, it'll give us the dimension between those points and the slope. Along with that, now we also have the ability to do a vertical dimension. So if you wanted to double check your pavement thickness or check something like a shoulder to the bottom of ditch to make sure that there is enough depth in your grading, you could pull a temporary vertical dimension as well to see those grades. As it mentions here, an excellent way, again, because it's labeling the slope, to check your super elevation to make sure that those are occurring correctly. Another option that you can get is you can turn on your display cut and fill graphics and see those in your dynamic section view. Again, from a perspective of accuracy, you could definitely use that for conceptual and preliminary design. As you move along into farther, your 60 and 90% plan production, you'd want to switch over and utilize more of our quantities and earthwork tools that we have developed, as these give us a good preliminary number, but a lot of things are not taken into account when we look at the cuts and fill volumes displayed in our dynamic section view. If you were doing any type of corridor clipping, the dynamic section view does not take that into account, where if you actually clip two corridors against each other or have something removed, the actual earthwork components understand exactly how all those pieces are fitting together and give you a more accurate representation of your earthwork quantities. Another tool that sits within the dynamic section view that is great for, again, getting information out of your design would be the indication of the magenta and green dots depicting either point controls or a parametric constraint. So if you're using either one of those options in your designs on your corridors, you will get these depictions in your dynamic section view, so that you'll indicate that a magenta dot is representing some type of point control. That can obviously be a horizontal, a vertical, or both. And then any type of parametric constraint, anytime you've set a label on your points in your template, you then have access to make those changes. So something like pavement depth or a width or even a potential of a cross slope adjustment, are all things that are set on these different points here. And then those get indicated when those are being enacted or those are being triggered by the designer. So again, another good indicator to know that certain things are occurring within your design. So moving on to, again, different, we've touched on this earlier, that again, when you click on a specific element and you have the contextual ribbon kind of come up, you'll notice that we get the different ribbons, or we get the different types of reports that we can select. If we click on a report, it comes up as an Excel style sheet. One thing to note about your reports is that by default, there is a default report associated to something like, say, a horizontal alignment, but you can select any of these different reports, and the information is just adjusted to maybe formatting, or different information is pulled per each of these. And at any point, you can actually right click on a report and set that as your default one. So if there's different information that you're looking for that maybe by the default one that comes out of the box is set to isn't the information that you're constantly looking for, you can make an adjustment to that so that a different one can change or be selected on instantly as you select the report. Also, if your agencies have developed specific reports, you can again point to those specific ones that would then be the default one, so that the default look and feel for how something like alignment information is depicted can be represented in this view then. And then you always have the ability to come up to the file and do a save as option, write that out to a Word document, write that out to a PDF, write that out to Excel, different options there that are available for the exporting of this data, so that a snapshot of that in point in time for reviewers, information can always be captured. So again, shown you that we could talk about extracting that information from the contextual ribbon. We could get that if we're looking at it in Explorer. Also on a number of our ribbons, again, if you ever look for the paperclip, you'll find the reports and different reports dialog boxes. So in this case, being on the geometry tab under the general tools here, we can drop down the reports and we see a number of different reports here that you can select from. The difference being here, where if we did it from the contextual ribbon, instantaneously the report would open up. In this case, if I select the horizontal geometry report, the first thing on the end of my cursor I would find is pick the alignment or even alignments that I would like to report on. So that would be the only big difference here, is that you need to look at the end of your cursor for the next prompt of what it is that you're wanting to report on. Oh, actually, to note too, you actually get some additional information, including in this case on a horizontal geometry report, do I want to report on the active profile instantly, or all the profiles that maybe are in the profile view? Those could be ditch grades, those could be alternative profiles, those types of things could be selected, whether you choose all, or it gives you the prompt for a selection of those different profiles that you'd want to include. Along with, you would have the ability to check on something maybe like you want an interval, so you want information at every 100 foot. If you move to something like the station-based reports, you can do that, where you could get a report of the profile every 50 feet along, your profile of your different alignments and everything. So a number of different ways, again, to get information out of the product. Again, looking at a corridor this time instead of an alignment. When we select the corridor reports, we get a number of different options to report on those, such as the component quantities. Just barely here in the bottom, you can see my component quantities, and one of the things that makes this customizable is I can go in and enter in a unit cost. So if I know what my dirt work is running per cubic yard, I can enter that cost in. If I know my pavement in, at least in this case, a volume, I could enter that in as well and start to generate a cost estimate for my project. Again, great tools to be utilized early on in conceptual design. Also have the ability to export these out to Excel and begin to add additional detail and get into your final cost estimate, not necessarily just from this one report. So looking at additional analysis tools here. So on the Home tab, if we look at a group called Model Analysis and Reporting, we'll find a number of civil analysis tools here. So we're going to run through a number of these different tools here. These actual tools happen to be found in a couple different locations in the different ribbons. One of those other locations happens to be on the Terrain tab. There's an entire category called Analysis, and you'll find all the or most of the exact same tools that we just saw listed here, just in a different order. You'll also notice that we see the create, cut, and fill volumes, the quantities by name boundaries, mass haul, and the end area volumes reports all being lumped in here. And again, not anything that I'm going to be able to cover today, but are covered in the earthwork and quantities course listed out on the Bentley Learn site. So looking at the first tool in the list here, the Analyze Point, this is a great one for being able to find the station and offset or station value of your alignments at different intervals. So myself being a GeoPack user, this would be the equivalent of a the plan view labeler. I know that there were a number of different tools for analyzing stuff coming out of inroads as well. So we still have a number of those same options to be able to click on our alignments and see things that are, station, offset, elevation. It'll even give you slope and a bearing or direction label as you click and move along the different alignments and stuff. So as you're trying to find where this curve actually begins, maybe you have some piece of utility or you're placing signs and you want to verify what their station and offset locations are, you're able to use the Analyze Point tool. You obviously see that depending on what you're using that in, whether it be a piece of geometry or even looking at analyzing a terrain, you get different information. And that information is, again, right at the end of your cursor. But I will note that you do also have a tool dialog box that is always open as well. That is giving you some of that same information as well. So you'll find this dialog box too. One thing to note about this box is sometimes maybe you find it in the way and you grab it and you slide it off. Well, this happens to be the active tool for MicroStation, and then you go and change to a different tool set and you need to key in information in your tool dialog box. Wherever you've slid in this dialog box off to, that is where you'll need to be looking for that information to maybe potentially enter in information in a tool dialog box. So just something to be aware of, not to just throw this off willy-nilly, I guess, anywhere on your screen, but to kind of maybe keep track of it, just kind of move it out of the way so that in case you're needing it later on, it's not lost at the time. We have another tool referred to as Inverse Point. And again, you can use that in either a 2D or 3D model. You can snap to points and it will generate the information. If you click on the send output, what you'll get is text along the line that based on the different information you also have checked on in the box here is what will be displayed in that text format. You can also get that to write out to a report as well. One note about if you have it just written into the file, depending on what the text style is that you last used and or whether annotation is enabled will depend on how large or small this text might be. So if you're doing the inverse tool and you're not finding that the information is showing up, you might need to check your annotation scale and verify that that is set appropriately, because the text could be really large and you're not even realizing it, or very small. Or you might even need to just go back and review which is the last text style that you were using and adjust that accordingly too, so that you get something that shows up appropriately for your readout. We have a analyze between points, so primarily used to on a terrain slope, so that you can snap either a proposed or an existing surface, and it'll show you what the beginning elevation was, the ending elevation. So your first snap, your second snap, what the slope is, the distance traveled, again, an angle or a bearing. And then again, that information will get written onto that point where you snap your line to review that information. So utilize, this with a perpendicular snap to double check your cross slopes on your pavement, whether that be existing or proposed, to make sure that maybe things are matching up or as expected, or you're double checking your grade on a ditch line. You could see where your ditch bottom is, snap at one point, snap at another, and verify that that is matching and all that information is accurate. A new tool that was recently just added is calculate area. This allows you to snap on any terrain and it'll give you the readout of its slope area and a planar area. So a 2D area versus what a sloped area would be equivalent to. In this case, I created my corridor into a terrain so I could select on it and I can see the difference in the two areas there depicted. I could use this with the fence command. So I could generate a fence along the slope of my side slope here, or my ditch bottom, or my back slope, and generate and see the difference between my planar areas and my slope areas, depending on how maybe I'm wanting to pay for my seed. The fact that the slope area will always be greater, I maybe want to use that to determine and use that area for my cost estimate for depicting my seeding area. It would be one example, I guess, that you could utilize that in. The Analyze Trace Slope tool here, we have a couple different settings. The first one we're depicting here is a minimum slope. So we snap to a point and we also say a minimum depth here of where water would pool. And that is depicted here in the blue, and that all this information, the purple and the blue, is coming from a feature definition that we've depicted as called trace slope. So we're able, you can see it leaves the information behind and it can show you where, if a drop of water was to fall, where it would run, where it would pool, and then continue to follow that along. This would have been the old trickle command in inroads if you use the drainage tools there. So I've got a quick video here that I can play to show this working. So we can see the tool there, and we'll go with the maximum slope trace to begin with. And again, that's more like a drop of water falling on your surface and it running, in the most direct way. You could also have it go up the slope as well, so you can retrace from a lowest point and see where the water would also be coming from, not necessarily always from the top down. You can start at the bottom and run it back up. So again, we indicate what slope we're getting, and we can see the multiple directions that a slope, you can see it actually branching off there as it would run down the hill. And then we've got some type of ditch down there at the bottom, and you can see where that pool elevation gets indicated by the blue area there. So again, we could move to a location there and continue tracing where the water could potentially run. And even while in the command here, you'll notice that on the end of your cursor there, you have the option to hit the Alt button or the Shift, which will change the command for you on the fly as well. So that same tool, we could also look at just looking for a constant slope. So in this case, looking for placing a point on the terrain and then looking for where is 10%. Another tool on the list there was the Analyze Volume. So we have a couple options here in this tool to analyze between a proposed and existing surface or between a proposed surface and a plane. One thing to note about this is that the readout on the information here will always be given to you based on the master units of your CAD file. So in our case, a lot of times when we start talking about volumes and earthwork, we're probably wanting to see cubic yards. In this case, this will all be delivered to us in cubic feet. If we click the Save Results box here, the item will be, again, placed at the end of your cursor. It'll pretty much be this readout of this text placed at the end of your cursor. And then you can place that near your element to have for further reference. Unfortunately, there's no way to write that out into a report at this time. We have some other tools that can do that. But if you use this Analyze Volume tool, just be aware that it's based on, again, the master units of your CAD file, which are usually set to feet for the geometry portion of the project and not set to yards, which is where we'd want to see this information generated in cubic yards. So again, same tool, but this time looking at it as a plane. So we've specified an exact elevation at which we want to see, how much volume is between that plane and either, again, a proposed or existing surface. So another tool we have is an Analyze Pond tool. If we use this tool after we've got either a proposed or existing pond, what we need to do is we click in the area of where the pond is, and then it'll give us, again, a volume, again, in your master units, a top elevation, a total area, and then the depth of that pond. So the specialty analysis tools here, I'm running up, I see that we're at about 11 or 12:50 your guys' time. I can either stop and answer any questions. I'm not sure if there's been many come through yet, or I can continue through and get through a few more slides here showing these specialty tools. I'll throw it back to you, Patty, if there's any questions out there yet.
Okay. I haven't seen any questions, just some kind of comments, but if anybody has a question, you can go ahead and type it in the chat box or raise your hand. But if you'd like to just keep going forward, oh, well, there's a question there maybe. Yeah, just please continue. This was the questions.
Okay. Well, I'll keep running through this and take us up to, as far again as I can get through. I got, this is the last section on the slides here. So if we talk about the specialty tools, first one I'm going to mention here would be the 3D drive-through. When you click on the tool, it comes up and looks like this, and you'll notice 3 different tabs here. One to note is that camera position. So one thing that as I played around with this tool more, I hadn't really used it much, I knew about it, was increasing the height of my eye, I guess, or the vertical offset, something up to the 3.5, 4 foot mark. So it's more at the elevation of where I guess you'd be at in a car. And then again, your target control distance, more looking at something like sight distance. So that 1.5 foot above the surface at a certain distance out, is kind of what this will give you here. So I'll click on this and let this video play, and you can kind of see how it works. When you click on the tool to kick it off, and it's going to prompt you for a 3D line. Let me actually go back. So you need to be in the 3D model, and it's asking for a 3D line. So any of your alignments, as soon as you assign profile, become a 3D line. So that's an excellent element to select on. Obviously, if we had a divided highway, that would have run us down the middle here. So you might need to pick something from your corridor objects as a lane line or some kind of joint line, maybe to move you over onto that. But if you were working on such as a ramp or just a 2-lane roadway, it'll kind of place you down the roadway. Your horizontal offset could have been adjusted as well. So you could adjust that over, say, 20 feet to put you on top of your pavement as well, as another way to work around that. So again, kind of mentioned this early on about, the Civil Message Center giving us information about our design standards, but one of those things would be applying design standards to your actual design. We'll click on this video and let this play. You can do that a couple different ways. So as you can see, the civil design toolbox actually open here. We've chosen 70 miles per hour at a 6% super, and then our stopping sight distance being the critical information there when we selected this. we have the ability, even if you don't do it at the time you lay out your design, to always come back and use the set option to set the design criteria on an element. The only thing that you're not really able to do on one single element is have multiple design speeds at this time. If you had a situation where your design speed is changing, you'd actually have to break your alignment into two different sections to be able to apply something like you're coming from a 55 mile an hour into a reduced speed and then into a 35 mile an hour design criteria. You would need to be able to have individual sections. In the future, though, we're hoping to be able to define a specific location where you'd be able to adjust something like that and have multiple design speeds on an individual element. And you can see there where we went through and did set that on there, and then you get the additional glyphs. Those show up in the civil message center. And again, as they showed in the video there, you can right click on those and have it zoom to a particular element. The next element is using the site visibility. So we run this tool. There's a couple different options that you can use, either AASHTO design criteria or a design table. A speed table to generate that information. And it goes along and looks at the terrain or terrains, because you can have both your existing and your proposed terrain along with, again, additional, say, 3D objects, that you have designed in your 3D model, so that it'll try and look, and we set up the criteria for where that information is looking. And then, so this initial run here, let that play. There we go. So as we, this isn't, why are we not? Sorry about this. This video should be playing. There we go. So that, I apologize for that. That first video should have shown us it running and there not being any conflicts, because we did not have a median barrier and everything checking out. And now this one, we go through and use a new corridor that we've gone ahead and placed a barrier down the center line. And as we select the criteria here for the site visibility tool, when it gets done processing, it will show us that we have some issues and we're not able to see around the corner because of those obstacles. So we set the design speed in this case, the interval at which we want to look, the object height, and then also the position down the road of what we're trying to look at. So it's asking us to pick our corridor. Again, all the criteria for the analysis, we're entering that in, even though we've kind of filled that in. And then the design surface. And then here again, you saw it went through quickly. We could have picked an existing surface as well, so that if there was information there. And then it generates a report here that we can see, okay, as we look along here, things are good, good, good. And then we get to a point where, okay, the visibility can't be met. And we can, again, select that individual line, right click on it. It'll zoom us to it, show us just that line, and show us where the impact is at along the alignment. So, and then this can also be generated into a report. And then the last tool to talk about is the ability to look at aquaplaning and determining where water might be standing along your corridor. So it generates a separate terrain based on the criteria of looking at your proposed corridor surface, and then a delta change based on the criteria that we've given it as far as a elevation of amount of water that could be standing on the surface. And then that is depicted, and obviously, again, we're looking at this with a theometric height display, and the different colors indicate. So where we have the potential for deeper ponding water to be standing in some instances is where that's being shown there. And then we're able to click on that terrain surface. And again, with the contextual ribbon, it understands that that is coming from the aquaplane analysis tool, and we're able to move over and generate the flow line reports. And then we're able to see the analysis here in a report that we can write out and have for our records as well. And we have additional reports that can be generated as well if there's particular ones that are needing to be met by certain agencies' requirements. And we'll take a look at the video here real quick of how the aquaplaning tool works. So we have our corridors here that are also have been made into a terrain. We have a couple different formulas in which we want to work with. What interval our flow lines will be generated at. Obviously, the tighter the interval, the larger and the more time it'll take to process the data. We do have a tool that allows us to add additional flow lines if there are areas that we have more interest in or want to see more detail into, so that it's not just every 100 foot. So we select our terrain here of the proposed area. It is then generated our information. We can see, again, we change that interval. And again, all this information on how this is being depicted and shown is coming from a feature definition that is delivered with the workspace from the out-of-the-box one, just called aquaplaning. So that generated the delta surface after it did the analysis. And then it's being depicted here with that theometric height. And in this area here where we can see the super elevation rolling over, and we have also an area at the intersection where we were transitioning some slopes there that maybe potentially have some area where the water is standing. We can also then switch the tools to, again, add that additional flow line in an area. So you're able to select on the surface and then move your cursor along to intensify those additional flow lines and areas so that the information is depicted with a little more detail if it's needed. So there you can see where that adjusted some of that slope there by adding in an additional flow line and getting the transition, and you see the gradient adjust. So that does take me to the end. I will throw it back out and see if there are any questions.
Yeah, that was great. A lot of useful tools there.
Yeah, I apologize about how much content I just covered. And
no, that was great. It was awesome. Yeah, there was a question about hydroplaning, but I think you covered that. And then there was another question about clash detection analysis, the minimum 3-foot cover from roadway subgrade surface and top of a culvert.
Okay, so that's another great question, and that's probably covered better in some of our drainage and utility portions, which we have had a number of updates to those on Bentley Learn as well. And I know in one of those courses, we cover exactly doing that and setting up the prototype information with defining that clearance around a particular pipe, maybe 18 inches or 3 feet or something like that, and then running clash detection as well. So we do have tools and abilities to do that. Unfortunately, I don't have any data to show that right now.
Okay. All right. I think that's it. I appreciate your help. A great presentation, and thanks everybody for joining us today. And with that, I'll just go over a few more reminders. So PDH receipts will be sent out in the next couple weeks for this. Just be sure to make sure we have your full name and that you've registered on the website. And then we have a bunch more Tech Talk topics coming up, so just be on the lookout for those. And then I wanted to mention, we put out on our website a few links to some Bentley courses. And I've gotten a few emails of people that had trouble accessing those. And I just wanted to make sure that y'all were aware that those are Bentley Learn sessions. And if you miss that one, you should be able to catch them on demand, but you might have to have a Bentley Connect link or website to set you up a Bentley account to access those. So that might be some people's issues with not being able to get those. If you have further questions, just feel free to email us and we'll try to help you get those worked out. Our winner today of the $50 gift card is Clint Morgan. So congratulations, Clint. We'll get up with you about that. Be sure to tell others about the NCLUG websites and events. We're trying to plan the rest of the ones throughout to finish out this year and hopefully continue these on through 2021 too. So if you got any comments or questions, just please send them to us. And thanks for joining us today, and hopefully we'll see y'all next week. And thank you so much, Dan, for.
Yes, no problem. I'm uploading the copy of the PDF from my presentation right now to the chat, and should be able to download that and take a look at it as well.
And I'll also post that on our website with the presentation.
There, it looks like it's still coming into the chat, but again, thank you very much for everybody and your time. Thanks, Patty. Hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you.